Welcome to the debate. Our focus today is on a really profound shift in consumer behavior. We're talking about the surging popularity of the buy nothing and no buy movements. And, this trend isn't happening in a vacuum. Its recent growth correlates directly with this widespread financial anxiety and, while some pretty serious predictions of economic contraction. We're looking at a fundamental response to modern capitalism.
Right, and I think the central question we're wrestling with is this. Is this conscious refusal to consume a true financial and psychological resistance, maybe even a quiet social revolution, or is it better understood as a powerful personal coping strategy, a survival mechanism in what feels like a really fragile economy?
Exactly. And I'm going to argue that this movement is fundamentally an act of profound resistance. It's a necessary reclaiming of both control and dignity from a system that's really built on keeping us dissatisfied.
And I see why you'd think that, but I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle. While I definitely acknowledge the powerful psychological elements, I frame this phenomenon primarily as a necessary high-level survival strategy. It's a powerful act of self-protection, a personal detox, yes, but I'm just hesitant to label it a social revolution when the market mechanisms designed for excess, well, they remain largely untouched.
The core of my position really rests on that idea of conscious rejection. The system we're all in it's specifically designed to keep individuals perpetually anxious, constantly comparing themselves to others, and ultimately, deeply indebted. The author of the source material shared this critical realization during their own no-buy year, which was back in the volatile climate of the 2008 downturn. And the realization was that simplicity and frugality aren't sacrifices. They are, in fact, sources of freedom and clarity. They are the ultimate survival strategy against financial stress. The true resistance here is psychological. It targets that marketing manipulation that tells us we are only valuable if we constantly acquire new things. When you consciously realign your spending with your core values, you preserve your dignity, your agency, against a market that just wants to commodify happiness. This refusal to buy unnecessarily, it's an ethical choice. It's perfectly summarized by the idea that how you spend your money is how you vote on what exists in this world. Refusing to vote for poor quality or exploitation, that's a moral ballot you cast every single day.
That's a powerful way to put it, that personal agency. Though I would frame the surge itself a bit differently. I think we have to start with the economic context. This movement isn't thriving because people just suddenly woke up feeling revolutionary. It's thriving because they feel acute financial fear. I mean, we have economists predicting a staggering 93% chance of a U.S. recession in the near future, and we know that over 20 states are already showing clear signs of economic contraction. So to me, the rise of the no-buy movement looks less like a proactive revolution and more like a mass reactive strategy. It's driven by the cold, hard reality of economic fragility. It functions as this powerful shield, an active protection against unavoidable systemic exploitation that's hitting consumers right now. For instance, we have to defend ourselves against planned obsolescence, which, just means goods are deliberately designed to fail quickly or become outdated. And we have to protect ourselves from shrinkflation, where companies just reduce the quantity of a product while keeping the price the same, or even raising it.
Of course.
And while I agree this strategy is highly effective for stabilizing individual budgets and discipline, it struggles to qualify as a social revolution when, at the exact same time, the market for extreme excess seems completely unfazed. We still see influencers flaunting these elaborate $6,000 pantry restocks and luxury consumers queuing overnight for collectible figurines. If the revolution is happening, it sort of feels like it's only happening for the financially anxious, while the rest of the market just keeps spinning.
But that rest of the market relies fundamentally on the same psychological manipulation that the no-buy movement actively targets and resists.
Well, yes.
I think everyone can recognize that feeling of being targeted by an algorithm, and that's where the resistance feels most personal and powerful. The source material highlights that industries actively profit by creating insecurity, constantly convincing women they're never pretty, stylish, successful, or young enough. We've seen evidence of this, like reports of Facebook monitoring teenage girls, deleting selfies specifically to trigger these highly targeted beauty ads. This shows that the calculated exploitation of emotional vulnerability it's integral to the consumer economy. And since women often manage household finances, about 60% of couple budgets, this movement becomes critical family protection. It's an exercise in teaching children contentment over consumption. The source material had that powerful exercise where the family stopped buying new toys and realized their happiness actually came from non-material things like movie nights, library visits, just focused attention. That's direct resistance.
That's powerful evidence on the marketing side, and I agree wholeheartedly that the psychological benefits are necessary for personal health. But those benefits, while profound, are still fundamentally defensive actions. We have to pause and ask if a personal detox is a sufficient form of resistance against the systemic normalization of financially destructive behaviors. I mean, think about the rise of phrases like cute debt, which tries to portray using credit to buy trendy, unnecessary stuff as empowering or fashionable. This is a deliberate cultural softening of financial recklessness. So, if the no-buy movement is born primarily out of financial anxiety, and the text explicitly links the surge to this, doesn't that suggest it's an inevitable reaction to economic stress, rather than a proactive revolutionary stance designed to dismantle the whole manipulative infrastructure? It shields the individual, but does it really weaken the forces that create the anxiety in the first place?
I'm not convinced that a necessary reaction to systemic exploitation can't also be revolutionary. In fact, when a system depends on generating perpetual anxiety for its own survival, the collective act of denying that anxiety its consumer outlet is the most profound form of resistance. It attacks the core vulnerability the system relies on.
Let's be precise about that change, though. You're speaking of an internal agency, the freedom gained by the individual. I acknowledge that, I do. But let's zoom out and look at the external mechanisms we talked about: planned obsolescence and shrinkflation. The continued existence of these things, it demonstrates that the system is already optimized for perpetual consumption, and it's designed to function irrespective of a vocal but still minority faction refusing to buy. So if the goal is a genuine revolution that alters production models, individual refusal, while morally potent, it may only offer temporary, individualized relief. It grants psychological freedom, but it doesn't really challenge the underlying exploitative structure that drives the anxiety.
I have to push back on the idea that this refusal is passive. It is anything but passive. Refusal is inherently a moral and practical vote against waste and low-quality goods designed through planned obsolescence. These economic systems rely entirely on consumer tolerance and, frankly, on consumer laziness. Every mindful, ethical purchase, or crucially, every mindful non-purchase, signals support for sustainability and authenticity. When consumers collectively redirect that financial yes toward durable goods, or more importantly, towards relationships, health, creativity, that constitutes the quiet social revolution. The system might be optimized for perpetual consumption, but the collective refusal to participate erodes the moral legitimacy and eventually the economic viability of these exploitative products.
I agree that the ethical ballot is cast, but how many people buying a $6,000 pantry restock does it take to nullify the ethical ballot cast by one person's no-buy year? That's where the scale becomes an issue for the revolution thesis. The individual who stops buying disposable electronics is making a commendable ethical choice, absolutely. But the massive corporations manufacturing that waste are still catering to the vast, globally consuming majority who are not participating in this. The primary driver for most participants, especially this new wave driven by the recession forecast, remains self-preservation. It's a pragmatic necessity before it's an ideological revolution. It's a powerful tool for surviving volatility right now.
But necessity sharpens agency. The fact that this movement forces consumers to recognize that they have a choice, that they are being manipulated, that is where the revolutionary seed lies. It changes an individual relationship with money from one of passive victimhood to active stewardship. And that is a critical prerequisite for any larger structural change. It moves beyond simple thriftiness and becomes a critique of the culture itself.
Okay, let's focus on that critique. If we accept that the primary mechanism for anxiety is planned obsolescence and aggressive marketing, then the most effective form of resistance would be political or regulatory action to eliminate those mechanisms, right? If the action is purely personal, a self-barricade of one's finances, it prevents individual harm but leaves the systemic tools intact, ready to target the next generation. The no-buy strategy is a spectacular individual defense, maybe the best tool we have for personal solvency in a volatile climate. I see it as an evolution of budgeting, a highly sophisticated financial self-care regimen, but I just struggle to equate personal solvency with systemic revolution.
But the two aren't mutually exclusive. The individual acting to preserve their own dignity, when multiplied millions of times, creates the necessary conditions for that larger change. It's the moral awakening that precedes the policy shift. When enough people realize that buying more does not equal happiness, the systems that rely on that false equation begin to crumble. Slowly, yes, but they do. The initial surge might be driven by anxiety, but the sustained commitment is driven by the realization of personal freedom. That sustained commitment is the resistance. So ultimately, the movement's strength really lies in its dual nature, as you've pointed out. It provides essential individual financial discipline, simplicity as power, while simultaneously operating as a profound psychological act of defiance. It's a necessary rebellion for preserving individual agency in a world determined to sell us the idea that happiness is something you can buy.
And I see it slightly differently, as an essential high-level survival strategy, a critical tool for self-protection against the relentless systemic pressures of consumer culture and acute economic volatility. We absolutely agree on the fundamental value of teaching contentment and escaping the anxiety trap, but the label of social revolution may just overstate its present impact on the powerful economic forces it seeks to resist.
Right. Regardless of our labeling, whether we call it resistance or survival, the intentional refusal to buy forces this crucial, necessary reassessment of consumption, financial vulnerability, and the personal values embedded in each of us. And that reevaluation alone makes this phenomenon profoundly important and certainly worthy of continued study.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking a long, serious look at a movement that, well, on the surface, it might just sound like another self-help trend. We're talking about the Buy Nothing movement. But the sources we've gathered, especially the analysis from Marissa, they suggest this is far, far deeper than just aesthetic minimalism or, simple frugality.
Oh, absolutely.
This is about establishing a really robust strategy of financial and psychological resistance.
That's exactly the right way to frame it. The core thesis here is it's pretty provocative.
Right.
It's that conscious refusal, and I mean the deliberate, sustained choice to just stop buying things you don't need. That is how individuals are fighting back.
Fighting back against what? Exactly.
Against this massive economic and cultural system that's, well, it's designed specifically to keep you anxious, to keep you chronically in debt, and constantly searching for validation through buying stuff.
So Marissa's argument is that this refusal, it's not about deprivation.
Not at all. It's the mechanism. It's how you reclaim fundamental control and clarity, and at the end of the day, freedom.
Okay, let's really unpack this and follow the thread through our sources. So our mission for this deep dive is to map out the current economic urgency. What makes this resistance so necessary right now?
Yeah, the why now is critical.
And we need to identify the very specific psychological targets that the market exploits, and then understand how all these systemic pressures transform the buy nothing idea from, say, a personal budget hack into what Marissa calls a powerful, quiet social revolution.
A revolution based on not doing something.
Exactly. We are looking at resistance defined by inaction.
And that differentiation is it's so key. We're not just here to summarize why people save money. We're analyzing why millions are choosing this proactive, almost philosophical kind of detachment.
Right.
It requires you to recognize that the opponent isn't just a clever ad. It's a sophisticated, pervasive architecture of consumption that profits immensely from our instability.
So choosing to disengage is what? A declaration of economic sovereignty.
That's a perfect way to put it, yes.
So let's start with that immediate context then. Why is this resistance, this movement, swelling up right now?
So Marissa notes this definite, when the market consensus is that bad, rational people stop thinking about, maximizing pleasure and start focusing intensely on minimizing risk.
And when we talk about that near certainty, it's not just based on vague gut feelings. For you listening, this prediction is driven by very specific indicators, right?
Absolutely. We're talking about things like the significant sustained inversion of the yield curve.
Which has historically been one of the most reliable predictors of a downturn.
Exactly. The most reliable. And on top of that, we're seeing tightening credit markets, we're seeing cooling housing starts, and softening hiring reports across major sectors. I mean, these aren't just whispers. These are measurable signals that professional forecasters simply cannot ignore.
So the data is screaming a warning.
It is. And the recession isn't some distant threat for everyone. Our sources highlight that early signs of contraction are already being felt across more than 20 states.
More than 20.
Yes. So think of those specific places, areas that might be heavily dependent on manufacturing, or regions that saw these massive housing booms and are now dealing with a rapid cooldown. For the people living in those 20-plus states, the financial pain, it's not hypothetical anymore.
No, it's real.
It's already affecting local hiring, it's affecting wage growth, and even just their utility costs. It's here.
So you have this widespread localized pain, and you combine that with a national indicator that suggests a severe contraction is almost guaranteed. This is the urgent, immediate fuel that's driving the no-buy strategy. I mean, when the ground is unstable, you stop investing in volatile assets.
And for many people, discretionary consumer goods are the definition of a volatile asset.
Exactly. But here's where that deep cultural dissonance kicks in, and it's almost surreal to watch.
It is surreal.
Despite these screaming economic alarm bells, consumer culture not only continues, but it actively pushes excess. Marissa points out the absurdity of people queuing overnight.
Yeah, that example is wild.
Yeah, not for a vital resource, not even for a deeply discounted necessity, but for collectible figurines.
Collectible figurines. It's a staggering example of prioritizing these ephemeral wants over any kind of long-term security.
It really is. And it speaks to a profound psychological mechanism at play, doesn't it? This pursuit of an immediate small hit of dopamine or social status, even when that pursuit violently conflicts with your underlying financial stability.
And then you have the influencer world, which takes this dissonance and just ramps it up into a form of performance art.
Oh, absolutely.
Marissa cites the example of influencers flaunting these elaborate, excessive purchases, and she specifically mentions the $6,000 pantry restock.
The $6,000 pantry.
I mean, this is an act of high-end consumption, and it's being marketed as an aspirational lifestyle. It completely disconnects necessity from spending. It frames luxury aesthetics as essential well-being.
You know, that $6,000 pantry restock is such a fascinating symbol because it embodies the impossible standard being broadcast.
It really does.
Because on the one hand, you have half the country struggling to afford basic groceries and worried sick about that 93% recession chance. And on the other, the cultural feed is demanding that their storage spaces look like a highly curated, professionally branded retail display filled with, specialized, expensive, imported goods.
It creates this almost unbearable psychological pressure to perpetually fail. Because who can realistically maintain a $6,000 pantry?
Nobody.
And that pressure cooker is exactly what drives people to the buy nothing choice. They recognize that the system is demanding they adhere to an unsustainable standard.
It's a breaking point.
It is. And Marissa draws a crucial historical parallel here. She notes that this current disconnect, this vast chasm between media-driven consumer optimism and the underlying economic fragility, is profoundly reminiscent of the uneasy calm before the 2008 Great Recession.
The uneasy calm. That's a chilling descriptor because it implies a kind of willful blindness, doesn't it?
It does. Before 2008, the mainstream narrative was fueled by accessible credit and this belief in perpetually rising housing values. It maintained an illusion of endless prosperity.
Right. And that illusion masked all the fundamental instability, like predatory lending and the housing bubble, right up until the whole thing just collapsed.
Exactly. And today, the illusion is maintained, maybe not by news headlines promoting eternal growth, but by the relentless, optimized stream of consumer-driven social media.
The message is the same, though.
The message is identical.
Yeah.
Keep spending, keep buying, everything is fine, look at these beautiful purchases. The resistance comes from those who see past that curated feed and recognize the fragility underneath the veneer of performance consumption.
They're the ones saying.
They're the ones saying, I see the recession indicator, I see the $6,000 pantry, and I am choosing to opt out of the game entirely.
I wonder, though, how much of that queuing up for the collectible figurines is actually fueled by a need for the object, and how much is more of a psychological coping mechanism.
It's a great question.
When the macro world feels so unstable, that 93% recession chance, people often gravitate towards small, manageable acts of control. Whether that's queuing for a limited item or buying an expensive candle. So is the buy nothing movement simply a healthier redirection of that same need for control?
That's a really important distinction to make.
Yeah.
Psychologically, when control is stripped away at the macro level, we absolutely grasp for it at the micro level. But the difference is the directionality.
What do you mean?
Buying a figurine or an expensive item is external control. It gives you a brief high. The buy-nothing approach, on the other hand, is internal control. It addresses the financial anxiety directly by building security. It moves the locus of control inward, replacing fear with actionable discipline.
So the decision to move from minimalism as like an aesthetic choice to no buy as an economic mandate, that's not just a transition, it's a strategic recognition of reality.
Yes.
You're moving from decorative thrift to a strategic withdrawal from a system you know is highly unstable.
Precisely. And that strategic withdrawal is based on this foundational philosophical realization that Marissa got from her own very challenging beginnings with this movement.
So we've seen the macro forces driving this anxiety. Now let's bring it down to the personal level. What does it take for one person to look at this enormous churning system and just decide, I'm opting out?
Yeah.
Marissa's personal catalyst is crucial here. Her first major no-buy year, it didn't start as some fun experiment.
No, it was born of necessity.
It was a desperate necessity driven by the 2008 downturn. It was after she found herself completely unable to find work in her field despite holding a master's degree.
And that detail about the master's degree is just incredibly sobering. It really underscores the severity of that economic collapse.
How so?
Well, it shows that credentials, education, hard work, they are insufficient guarantees when the system itself is structurally compromised. When that fundamental social contract, work hard, get ahead, when that fails, it forces a radical reevaluation.
She realized her security wasn't in her resume.
Exactly. It had to be internal.
And from that deeply challenging, scary period of external failure, she extracted the foundational quote that is really the cornerstone of this whole philosophy. It perfectly encapsulates that shift in perspective.
Yeah, that quote is it's so powerful.
You can't control the economy, but you can control your response to it.
That quote is pure empowerment. It's pure agency. When you look at a 93% recession chance, the news is paralyzing. It makes you feel helpless.
Right.
But focusing on your response immediately makes the problem actionable. It's an assertion that even if the giants of finance and government are stumbling, you retain the ability to steer your own ship.
And that control over your spending becomes the anchor in a financial storm.
It does.
For so long, we've associated frugality with sacrifice or scarcity. But in Marissa's framework, the script just flips entirely. Simplicity and frugality, they aren't punishments. They are reframed as essential survival strategies.
Yes.
And they lead directly to freedom.
This is such a powerful semantic shift. Because how does cutting back lead to freedom? It's about reducing your necessity of participation in the system.
Explain that.
Well, every non-essential dollar you keep is a reduction in your dependency on external forces, like a high salary, an unreliable job, or easy credit. The less you need to spend to maintain your lifestyle, the more resilient you become.
So you gain the freedom of mobility.
You gain the freedom of mobility, the freedom to choose a less stressful job, or the freedom to weather a period of unemployment without panic. Financial lightness is the ultimate form of preparedness.
But I wonder, though, does this philosophy of frugality as freedom really apply to everyone? I mean, the cynical view might be that buy nothing is only a sustainable choice for people who are already financially stable enough to coast or who've already acquired what they truly need. Does Marissa's work acknowledge the structural necessity of consumption for those living, paycheck to paycheck?
That's a really important question, and it demands some nuance. While Marissa's argument is aimed squarely at discretionary consumption and the systemic manipulation around it, the very act of building financial resilience through frugality is, I would argue, more critical for lower-income individuals.
More critical.
Absolutely. If you have no buffer, a sudden job loss is catastrophic. Frugality, in that context, becomes the necessary strategy for creating that buffer. So the philosophy shifts from, I won't buy this luxury item, to, I will strategically reduce spending on non-essentials so I can build a safety net against economic chaos.
So it democratizes the ability to gain agency.
Exactly. Even if the absolute amount of savings differs wildly between income levels, the principle of gaining control remains the same.
That makes sense. It's not about buying nothing forever, but about gaining mastery over the purchasing impulse to build that resilience.
Yes.
And the source confirms that this isn't a one-time cleanse for her. She and her family adopted annual no-buy months, specifically to realign their spending. That speaks to the need for sustained discipline.
Absolutely. The no-buy month is a crucial mechanism for maintaining the freedom they achieved. You have to think of it as a defensive measure against lifestyle creep.
That insidious tendency to just spend more as your income goes up.
Right. It just happens. Over a year, the consumer messaging, it inevitably starts to chip away at your psychological defenses. You start rationalizing small purchases again. Oh, it's just this one thing.
So the no-buy month is the reset button.
It's the annual detox. It forces a full audit of your habits. It's a moment to declutter not just the physical stuff that accumulated over the year, but also the mental baggage and the habitual, often mindless, compliance with cultural expectations.
You're forced to ask yourself, was that $100 I spent on those new items truly adding value, or was it just muscle memory following a marketing impulse?
And because this practice is integrated as a family routine, it cements the values for everyone. Consumption can often drive family tension. The kids want the latest gadget. A spouse wants the trendiest item. By making the no-buy month a shared activity that's focused on internal values, they build this collective resilience against those external psychological pressures, which, as we're about to see, are often surgically targeted.
It's a beautiful paradox, really. The ultimate goal is independence, financial and psychological. And the vehicle for that independence is radical self-control over acquisition.
It's the ultimate counter-narrative to the capitalist ethos.
And that ability to maintain this robust internal firewall to clearly distinguish between what you value and what the market wants you to value, that's the prerequisite for the next stage of resistance, right?
Yes, that's when you start recognizing the precise mechanisms of manipulation.
Okay, let's peel back the curtain on the targets. Marissa makes a very clear and powerful argument here that women have been the prime targets of manipulative marketing for decades. This isn't just random market segmentation.
No, it's a specific, highly profitable business strategy, and it's built on manufactured inadequacy.
It's an extractive model, you said?
It is. The profit structure of vast industries, from cosmetics and fashion to self-help and diet products, it depends entirely on creating and sustaining perpetual insecurity. They succeed by convincing women they are never quite pretty enough, stylish enough, successful enough, or young enough.
And if the product genuinely solved the problem, say it helped you meet a specific beauty standard, the industry would collapse after everyone achieved it.
Of course.
So the business model requires the goalposts to constantly move. It ensures the consumer is forever in pursuit of the next slightly better, often more expensive palliative purchase. It's just a never-ending treadmill of inadequacy.
And today, this manipulative strategy is just amplified exponentially by technology. It moves beyond generic billboards into these direct, personalized digital assaults on your self-esteem. The source provides a truly disturbing example of how technology exploits emotional vulnerability.
Yes, the citation regarding algorithms. It reported that algorithms, specifically those used by major platforms, were allegedly monitoring teenage girls deleting their selfies.
Just think about that for a second.
To then trigger immediate targeted beauty ads.
Let's just reflect on the ethical implications of that capability. It means the system isn't just waiting for you to type in a search query. It's actively monitoring moments of profound, private self-criticism or insecurity.
So a teenager deletes a photo, maybe because she's feeling ugly or inadequate in that moment.
And the algorithm registers that vulnerability instantly, and it capitalizes on it by serving an ad for a product that promises to fix her perceived flaw. This is real-time emotional warfare. It is weaponizing insecurity for profit.
What are the ethical guardrails here? What does the source material suggest should be applied to algorithms that are capable of exploiting vulnerability in real time? Because that level of targeting, it goes so far beyond standard behavioral advertising.
It really does.
It crosses a line into actively monitoring emotional states, and it reinforces the absolute worst aspects of self-doubt.
Well, the problem, as highlighted by those arguing for this resistance, is that the guardrails are almost non-existent, or at best they're reactive. The architecture of these platforms is designed for maximum engagement and maximum conversion, which often means maximum exploitation of psychological weak points.
So the only immediate personal guardrail available to you, the consumer,
Is recognition and withdrawal. The buy nothing movement is, in this sense, a refusal to grant the algorithm any input or compliance that it can monetize. You're starving the beast.
And the manipulation doesn't just stop at appearance. It extends directly into financial decision-making through what our sources call cute debt.
Ugh, cute debt.
This is a deliberate aesthetic trend that's attempting to normalize financial irresponsibility and mask the stress of borrowing money.
Cute debt is so insidious because it makes poor financial choices look charming and empowering. The prime contemporary example is the rise of buy now, pay later schemes, or BNPL. These payment methods offer instant gratification, get the cute item right now, while fragmenting the cost into these small, non-threatening installments.
So it effectively removes the friction and the perceived penalty of debt. There's often no interest if you pay on time, and the debt itself doesn't feel like a high-interest credit card balance. It feels more like a minor scheduling issue.
But what it does is it normalizes constant small indebtedness. And it targets demographics, particularly younger people, who are maybe less financially literate and more easily convinced that instant access is a substitute for fiscal responsibility.
It's marketed as flexibility.
Right, but it's really a tool for bypassing your internal financial discipline. It's basically saying, don't worry about budgeting or saving, just buy it and figure out the small payments later. The accumulation of all these small, cute debts can be just as financially debilitating as a large loan.
But the psychological pain is deliberately masked.
It's completely masked by the non-threatening payment structure.
And why is this elaborate, multi-pronged attack on insecurity and on financial discipline, why is it focused so intently on women?
It comes down to their strategic role as the financial gatekeepers.
That's the key structural element.
It is. Data consistently shows that women manage household budgets in about 60% of couples. So they are the primary decision makers controlling the flow of capital out of the household.
So if an industry can successfully convince the gatekeeper that she is personally deficient without the new item, whether it's the latest fashion, a complex organizational tool, or an expensive new health routine, they unlock the potential for continuous spending and family debt.
This means the manipulation is highly strategic. It's not just about selling a single item to an individual, it's about influencing the entire financial ecosystem of a household through its most critical spending node.
It guarantees long-term profit by securing control over 60% of household capital allocation.
Exactly. Consequently, when we synthesize this entire section, the Buy Nothing Rebellion isn't just about saving money anymore. It becomes this profound act of protection.
Protection.
You're shielding yourself and your family from both the psychological damage of the insecurity machine, which is actively monitoring your vulnerability, and the resulting financial harm driven by cute debt normalization.
So the refusal to buy becomes a proactive defense of mental health and long-term financial stability. It's basically saying, I recognize the trap, I see the algorithms watching me, and I am deliberately denying them the data and the conversion by withholding my capital.
And that intentionality, that elevates this movement far beyond simple budgeting. It is a necessary response to an intentional, targeted, and increasingly sophisticated form of economic warfare waged on the individual consumer.
The need for resistance is also dictated by the fact that the entire consumer structure is, well, it's fundamentally rigged against longevity.
It really is.
We need to talk about the systemic obstacles that are designed to force us back into the purchasing cycle, regardless of our personal discipline.
And we have to start with planned obsolescence. This isn't a theory. It's the deliberate engineering of consumer goods to ensure they degrade, fail, or just become undesirable faster than necessary.
It guarantees perpetual consumption.
And continuous profit flow from manufacturers. It's built into the business model.
When our sources state that appliances, clothes, and electronics degrade faster by design, we need to understand the mechanism. Planned obsolescence, it generally falls into two categories, right?
Yes, material failure and then psychological or systemic failure.
So material failure is the classic example.
Right. Building a crucial component, like a bearing or a gear, out of cheap plastic when it should be metal. You're ensuring it snaps shortly after the warranty expires.
Or designing a product with proprietary screws or inaccessible batteries, making it impossible for you to repair it yourself.
Yes, so you're forced to throw away the whole item instead of replacing a small, cheap part. It's incredibly wasteful.
And the second type, psychological or systemic obsolescence, that feels even more insidious.
It is. Think of electronics. The hardware in your phone might still be perfectly functional, but the manufacturer releases a mandatory software update that slows the previous model to a crawl or removes its compatibility with essential apps.
That's psychological coercion.
It is. The manufacturer is telling you your perfectly good physical device is now functionally obsolete unless you purchase the newer model.
Another classic example is printer ink cartridges coated with microchips.
Oh, don't get me started. The cartridge still has ink in it, but the chip dictates that the printer refuses to work after a certain page count. It's purely to maximize the sale of their expensive high-efficient ink. This deliberate design for rapid failure and maximum waste is the engine of modern consumerism.
And if that wasn't enough to force your spending, they also employ shrinkflation. This is the dual deception where they simultaneously reduce the quantity of a product while maintaining or sometimes even raising the price.
Shrinkflation is just a masterful, low-grade systemic pressure. It attacks you, the consumer, on two fronts. First, the financial hit. You are paying more per unit of product, plain and simple.
And second, the psychological hit.
Exactly. It erodes trust, and it fundamentally insults your intelligence. Companies are banking on shoppers being too busy or distracted to notice that the cereal box is 10% lighter, or the bag of chips has fewer ounces.
And the practical result is that it forces you back into the purchasing cycle sooner. If your detergent bottle is a few ounces smaller, you need to buy a new one 3 days earlier than you did last year.
It's a constant, relentless turnover requirement. It ensures you never achieve long-term sufficiency in your consumables.
So the consumer is caught between the inevitability of planned failure for durable goods and the systemic manipulation of quantity for consumables.
Both mechanisms are designed to prevent the individual from ever achieving independence from the market. And this structural deceit is what transforms mindful spending into a moral act.
And this leads us directly to the ethical spending discussion. When you realize the system is based on calculated deceit, planned waste, and the psychological exploitation of insecurity, personal spending decisions, they cease to be neutral or benign.
No, they can't be.
They become an ethical and political vote.
And Marissa relies on the foundational work of Vicki Robin here. She cites the core concept from Your Money or Your Life, which is, how you spend your money is how you vote on what exists in this world.
And that quote is just profoundly powerful because it puts the weight of responsibility right back on the individual. Every single dollar is an endorsement.
It is.
Are you endorsing the system of planned obsolescence and waste and corporate cynicism, or are you voting for something different?
And Marissa's interpretation is crystal clear. Mindful spending is a vote for sustainability, quality, and authenticity over waste. If you choose to invest in a high-quality, repairable product from a company known for ethical practices, you are funding an infrastructure built to last.
But if you continuously buy the cheapest, most disposable version,
You are funding the infrastructure of disposability, of environmental degradation, and of perpetual replacement.
But let's address the elephant in the room here. The common critique of voting with your wallet is that individual spending is just a drop in the ocean compared to the billions spent by corporations and governments. How does the buy nothing philosophy respond to the charge that individual resistance is ultimately meaningless?
That's a valid skepticism. And the source material counters it by emphasizing the power of collective withholding.
Collective withholding.
Yes, individual spending on essentials is necessary, of course. But when millions of consumers collectively withhold their capital from a specific category of discretionary, ethically compromised goods, say fast fashion or non-repairable electronics, that creates market signaling that businesses cannot ignore. They feel that pressure immediately.
So it's the difference between a single drop and a collective drought.
That's a great way to put it. If enough people stop buying the cheapest, fastest failing product, demand shifts toward durable goods, and that forces manufacturers to adjust their design mandates.
The buy nothing movement is the ultimate expression of this collective withholding then. It's a total economic protest against systemic flaws.
It forces the system to confront its dependence on rapid turnover. By refusing to comply with the cycle of replacement, these consumers are actively defunding the infrastructure of waste. And that quiet refusal, multiplied across a population, is indeed the powerful economic leverage Marissa identifies.
Moving from economic protest to a broader cultural shift, one of the most vital areas of the Buy Nothing movement is the generational impact. This centers on the critical role of parents in teaching their children the profound value of contentment over consumption.
If the underlying engine of consumer culture is perpetual dissatisfaction, then the key weapon against it is cultivating internal contentment. It has to be.
And if parents fail to instill this value,
Then the commercial system, as we've discussed, will just rush in to define their children's worth entirely through external purchases.
so how do parents practically implement this counter-narrative? It requires significant discipline, not just in their own spending, but in managing the cultural and digital exposure that constantly bombards children with images of lack.
Oh, it requires proactive engagement, structured resistance to media, and the intentional teaching of delayed gratification. For instance, rather than instantly satisfying every expressed desire, parents have to create conversations around marketing,
Like what?
asking children, "Why do you think the company wants you to buy this right now?" It shifts their perception of a product from a necessary good to a deliberate commercial manipulation. You're teaching them to see the strengths.
And Marissa shares a wonderful, simple exercise from a financial independence book that illustrates this shift in perspective perfectly.
The happiness exercise.
Yes. Each family member was asked to list 10 things that make them happy.
And the result of this exercise is just a profound indictment of the entire consumer model. The striking result was that the items that generated true, lasting happiness were almost universally non-material.
What kinds of things were on the list?
They listed things like family movie nights, visits to the library, watching animals play outside, reading a book, or simply having quiet time with a parent.
You know, that list provides unparalleled clarity. If your family's sources of joy are non-commodified experiences, time spent together, engagement with nature, creativity, then you know exactly where to prioritize your energy and your capital. And you know what is utterly superfluous.
It completely decouples emotional fulfillment from economic activity.
It does. When you realize that the most precious things in your life are essentially free, the pressure to chase the constantly moving target of advertised happiness just evaporates. That $6,000 pantry restock looks ridiculous next to the simple joy of watching a squirrel bury a nut.
It really does.
And this exercise, it serves as the foundation for the powerful generational warning she offers. Our sources include the quote that really stresses this critical parental responsibility.
It's a powerful one.
If we don't teach our children what enough looks like, the world will teach them that whatever they have is never enough.
And that statement captures the core tension. The commercial world depends on a perpetual dissatisfaction. It needs the consumer to believe that whatever they have, the house, the car, the body, the clothes, is insufficient.
So teaching enough is an act of liberation.
It is. It defines sufficiency internally. It provides children with a benchmark that is not controlled by external advertising budgets.
This makes the cultivation of contentment an active, profound act of psychological defense for the next generation. Contentment is not passivity.
Not at all.
It's an active decision to define your own boundaries against external pressure. It's the ultimate counterpunch to the insecurity machine.
And this brings us to the philosophical culmination of the entire movement. The realization that saying no to unnecessary consumption is a source of immense strength, not a sign of deprivation.
That distinction is so vital. Deprivation implies a forced loss or a lack of resources. Agency implies conscious choice and retained power. So the Buy Nothing movement is fundamentally about preserving one's dignity and agency by refusing to be a predictable target of manipulative engineering.
Think about the person who can resist the pressure of the algorithm, who can look at that $6,000 pantry and feel nothing but clarity. That person retains their dignity because they have asserted control over their resources, their attention, and their self-worth. They are no longer a cog in the machine of disposability or a victim of psychological manipulation.
And the resistance is incomplete if it's just a blanket no. It requires redirection. The energy and the capital freed up by refusing consumption, they aren't intended to just sit idle.
No, they are redirected toward things that truly matter, that non-commodified list of joy: relationships, health, creativity, and peace.
So the refusal to buy the new phone or the new outfit or the unnecessary gadget is actually a yes to personal flourishing.
It's a yes to financial independence, a yes to deeper family connection, and a yes to time spent pursuing health or creativity. The money you save becomes capital that funds a life aligned with your true values.
So the final synthesis offered by Marissa is that the Buy Nothing lifestyle serves two interconnected purposes. First, it's a profound personal detox, clearing out the physical and emotional clutter of consumerism.
And second, it is a quiet social revolution against a culture that has erroneously linked human worth to financial wealth and constant acquisition.
It's accessible economic power.
That's it. You don't need political influence or corporate wealth to participate. You only need the awareness to recognize the manipulation and the discipline to choose not to comply. And that collective quiet refusal is a powerful force for demanding transparency, sustainability, and quality from the global market.
And ultimately, it forces you, the individual, to confront the most fundamental question. If I'm not defined by what I own, if my worth is not in my wallet or my curated pantry, then who am I? And the freedom found in that internally defined answer is the ultimate achievement of this resistance. This has been an incredibly detailed deep dive into the philosophy, the economics, and the psychological strategies underpinning the Buy Nothing movement. Before we conclude, let's quickly review the most crucial insights for you, our listener, to take away this week.
First, I'd say just grasp the economic urgency. With forecasters predicting a near-certain recession, the Buy Nothing strategy is moving from a lifestyle choice to a necessary financial defense mechanism. The resistance is fueled by the need for survival and resilience.
Second, recognize the manipulative architecture of marketing, particularly the targeted efforts against women that weaponize insecurity and normalize financially destructive concepts like cute debt. Choosing not to buy is an active form of psychological and financial protection against these mechanisms.
And third, remember that every single purchase carries ethical weight. You are voting with your money. You are either funding systems built on planned obsolescence and calculated waste, or you are funding systems that prioritize quality, sustainability, and respect for the consumer's intelligence.
So we leave you with this final provocative thought about agency and control, building on that idea that the revolution starts with your wallet. If every dollar is a vote, what system or value are you funding with your next purchase?
And perhaps more critically,
What truly significant, unnecessary no could you implement in your life right now that would unlock the most meaningful and non-commodified yes? A yes for your relationships, your health, or your lasting peace.
the definition of enough is your most powerful tool. We encourage you to reflect on that question this week. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
See you next time.